It was just past midnight. Deep in the ancient woods of Black Hollow, Oregon, a man dressed in tattered ritual robes stood in a small clearing. His neck was adorned with a necklace of yellowed bones. Before him sat an old iron-bound chest that looked like a coffin. A fire pit burned with strange herbs and animal fat, sending thick black smoke into the air. He chanted in a forgotten tongue, throwing handfuls of powder into the flames. The fire flared green. Then, with one swift motion, he slit the throat of a bound coyote and poured its blood over the chest. The wind howled. The trees shook violently. Coyotes in the distance began screaming in unison. Lightning cracked across the sky even though there were no storm clouds. The man threw his head back and laughed. A deep, guttural, inhuman sound that echoed through the darkness. 6 hours earlier, a team of 20 archaeologists and laborers had arrived at the edge of Black Hollow Forest. The U.S. Geological Survey had reported massive coal deposits beneath this remote stretch of old-growth forest in the Pacific Northwest. The land was surrounded on 3 sides by jagged cliffs and freezing rivers. Only a couple of tiny towns existed nearby, and even the locals avoided the deep woods. "All right, everyone," said Dr. Marcus Hale, the team leader. "We set up camp tonight and start clearing at first light. This is going to be a big one." The deeper they drove into the forest, the worse the feeling got. "Boss, I just saw 2 glowing red eyes," whispered Tyler, one of the younger surveyors. "Probably a mountain lion." "Keep moving," Marcus replied. But others heard it too: footsteps, heavy breathing, branches snapping where no one was standing. That first night, the entire team slept inside the trucks and RVs. No one wanted to pitch tents in the dark. At 5:30 a.m., they began work. As the sun rose, they discovered something deeply disturbing. The trees were wrong. Some had faces carved into the bark. Twisted, screaming human faces. Others had old dolls made of twigs and human hair hanging from nooses. Strange symbols were burned into the wood. Symbols that made the native consultant they'd brought along visibly uncomfortable. "Dr. Hale, we should not be here," she said quietly. "This place is marked." They pressed on anyway. Hours later, they found the ruins of an old wooden structure deep in the trees. What remained of a forgotten settler church or meeting house. The team tore it down to continue excavation. 25 feet down, the diggers hit something solid. "Boss, there's a box down here." They pulled up an old iron chest wrapped in heavy, rusted chains. Strange markings and warnings were etched all over it. The moment they struck the chains with a sledgehammer, every dog and coyote within miles began howling. The sky darkened even though it was only 2 p.m. A massive flock of ravens exploded into the air, blotting out the sun. When they finally cracked the chest open, everyone froze in horror. Inside was a severed human head, perfectly preserved, eyes wide open, mouth stitched shut with black thread. Ancient runes and protective sigils were carved into its scalp. Next to it lay a separate mummified torso. "Oh my God! Close it! Put it back!" someone screamed, but it was too late. That night, the nightmare began. Emily woke up in her tent to the sound of footsteps circling her shelter. She stepped outside with a flashlight and saw nothing. But as she walked towards Sarah's tent to check on her, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She turned. Nothing. Then the footsteps got faster, closer. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped out from behind a tree. As it got closer, Emily realized it had no head, just a ragged, bleeding stump at the neck. The headless body raised its long arms. Before she could scream, something else appeared. The severed head floating in the air, its dead eyes locked on her. A clawed hand punched straight through her chest. Emily's blood-curdling scream woke up the entire camp. They found her later, hanging upside down from a tree, throat torn open, blood still dripping. Panic set in. The team tried to leave the next morning, but strange accidents kept them trapped. Radios and phones stopped working. Trucks wouldn't start. Trees seemed to move, blocking paths. One by one, the Headless One picked them off. Tyler was dragged from a moving truck. Sarah was found hanging like Emily. Marcus tried to reason with the lone survivor they finally captured. an old native man who had been watching them. "You woke him," the old man whispered. "He was bound for over 140 years. This forest was never yours." The Headless Man was a brutal settler killer who murdered women and children in the 1880s. The tribes and early settlers worked together to bind him, head and body separated, both sealed with old magic. "But greed always returns," he continued. "When you tore down the old church and dug him up, I had no choice. I released the body. The forest protects itself." By the final night, only a few remained. They ran through the black woods, screaming, crying, begging. The Headless One toyed with them, his floating head watching from the trees while his body chased them down. The last survivor, bleeding and broken, collapsed near the original dig site. The old man stood over him. "You came for coal," he said softly, "but the forest took its payment in blood." The floating head slowly descended in front of the final survivor's face, smiling. Moral of the story: some places were never meant to be disturbed. Some evils were buried for a reason. If you love dark, chilling, true-to-life horror stories like this, make sure you're subscribed to Eerie Narratives with notifications on. Drop a like if you want more American forest horror, and tell us in the comments. Would you have opened that box?